Welcome to the François Picard debate. Tonight, as the family of Michael Brown call for the police officer who shot him to be arrested, as the actions of the police on the streets are called more and more into question, and as the Missouri National Guard is sent in, we're asking how this American story came to be. What are the factors that led to the shooting of an unarmed black teenager by an officer whose pledge was to serve and to protect? We have guests with strong views, and I'll try to ensure balance and fairness. We'll meet them in a moment. First, let's have a reminder of what each side's been saying. First, we'll hear from the family of Michael Brown.
My son just turned 18 and graduated from high school. He don't bother nobody.
This was the last actions that our family member made before he went to rest. This will be stuck in my family's memories for the rest of our lives. So when you protest,
losing a child is difficult in any circumstances. In these, I can not begin to imagine the pain people are going through. Let's listen now to what some of the police reaction.
Police were shot at. Makeshift barricades were set up to block police. Bottles and rockets were thrown at police. Based on these conditions, I had no alternative but to elevate the level of our response.
Just to clarify, Captain Ron Johnson there talking about his reaction, the police reaction to the riots and the situation that ensued after the shooting of Michael Brown, of course, shot dead in that street in Ferguson, Missouri. Let's introduce you to our guests here in the studio. We have Nicole Bacheron, historian and political commentator, researcher at Stanford, specialist on American society. Thank you very much for joining us. On the other side of our studio, Estelle Gebenou, based in the US. Estelle is a consultant in sustainable development at the Permanent Mission of the Central African Republic to the UN. Your experiences on the streets in the United States, very important to this debate. Clément Thierry is doctor in sociology at Columbia University, an expert on racial segregation in the US. Thank you, sir, for being with us. We have two guests joining us from afar, and we hope to hear lots from them during this debate. From the US via duplex, we have William Terrell, who is professor at the School of Criminal Justice at Michigan State University, specialist on policing in the United States. So it's very clear, sir, what we're looking for from you. Thank you for agreeing to be with us. Joining us by phone as well, we have a gentleman who's very much at the heart of what's happening on the streets in Ferguson right now. A rap star, rap artist and protest organizer by the name of Tef Poe, joining us from St. Louis. Good evening to you, sir. If you can hear me, I'd like to start with you, Tef Poe. Tell us exactly what's happening where you are, what is being organized at the moment, and what the feeling is on the streets.
Well, what's going on in Ferguson is the fact that the police have lost power and control of that area, and they're responding with brute force. And there's no litigation. There's bringing more guns in, more weapons in, and the community is responding to that in a violent nature. People are looking for answers and transparency, but the police force isn't giving them any. And as we all know, the average person isn't that intellectual of a being. So their response is to go grab a bottle or a gun and respond in that way in hopes that they'll get justice through these types of actions.
So when you're organizing the protests, Tef Poe, what are you saying to people? Are you saying to them, be calm? Are you saying to them, react the way you want to react?
We're definitely telling people to be peaceful, and the vast majority of the protesters are peaceful. But what we're dealing with is a community of people that have been restrained and brutalized by Ferguson police and St. Louis County police for many generations. So now this is their opportunity to fight back, and folks are fighting back however they deem necessary. I don't agree with the violent responses, but I understand where it's coming from.
Tef Poe, bear with us. We'll get back to you as soon as we possibly can. I'm going to bring in our guests here in the studio. Nicole, I'll start with you. In terms of what we're hearing there from Tef Poe, who's organising on the streets there, calm demonstrations he's talking about. He's saying that this is something that's been bubbling up over many generations, the way that police deal with people.
Yeah, the way I understand it, it seems to me that Missouri and St. Louis in particular, and maybe so Ferguson, has never had its moment of truth. has never confronted truly its racial past. And it's a very complicated and very nasty history at times. You know, Missouri was split between the Confederacy and the northern states during the Civil War. During segregation, St. Louis was one of the most segregated cities in the country. And later on, there was some integration, but it didn't go very far. And what we're seeing today in Ferguson is a situation that we had hoped would be of the past. And that the black community, which is like about 2/3 of the population in Ferguson, is facing a completely white or almost completely white power structure. I'm thinking about the mayor, the city council, the school organization, the police, obviously. And the situation of having to deal with the violent death of Michael Brown is kind of falling into a massive resentment against the police force in Ferguson. And I guess that's part of the situation we're seeing today.
At this point, I need to clarify that we've asked the police force in Missouri to take part in this program. They have not got back to us, despite numerous phone calls that we've made to them. We've also asked a support group via social network backing the police officer who shot Michael Brown to take part too. They said that they were not interested in joining our debate. Let's bring in Estelle, who has experience of life living in the United States. Are you shocked by the reaction that there's been in Ferguson?
Not really.
Seriously?
I'm not shocked by the reaction of... I'm not really shocked by the situation because I noticed while I was living in the US that the system was very aggressive. The police is very aggressive and very reactive to any kind of infringement to the law. So those kind of situations are predictable, and it happened before. So I'm not really surprised, and I'm really sad about it. It's a very, very sad situation. And I think measures had to be taken to find the peace between those communities, because there is a real friction between the black community, the African American, and the social life. There is a lot of poverty, there is a lot of disillusions, and they have to find a way to get out of it for a peaceful community, for a peaceful life. It's very important.
There are lots of places where there's that disillusionment and that kind of unrest and that kind of bad feeling regarding one's circumstances. It doesn't necessarily end up, Clement, I'll bring you in now, it doesn't necessarily end up with a police officer shooting down a man seemingly unarmed, hands up, in the street.
Precisely what is like interesting about like this event, like from like just not what is happening on the ground, but like more generally like for the whole like American society, is this kind of like tremendous use of police force towards black people. And we have like first the example of like Michael Brown, who is like basically like at the beginning it was just about like jaywalking. How come like jaywalking becomes something where you get arrested and maybe shot at? What is the process behind that? And in fact, what we see is like the new form of policing in the US that has been basically like around the massive incarceration of young black male in the US in the past like 30 years. So here we have a very clear example of that. On the other hand, we have like the massive use of like police force against protesters. And we have like these two like very different examples, but very linked example of the transformation of the police in the US in the past like 20, 30 years, like basically since like the 1990s.
And that is because they're facing a more aggressive customer on the street, as it were, or because there's more pressure on them to get results, or because...
It has been like the transformation of the ways in which like police forces has been like organized in the US, and I think like your guest from like Michigan State University knows that very well. Like it's basically at the early 80s, we start to like basically transform what is it to do policing, and the key example, for instance, in New York City, with the use of like certain software CompStat, the definition, localization of what we call hotspot, basically like in low-income minority neighborhoods, like certain corners are defined as hotspot. What the police, what the NYPD does, and what I believe what Ferguson PD does is like to put cars outside of this corner and to arrest everyone from the most like minor infractions, for instance, jaywalking, tinted windows on cars. And the idea is like, if we arrest people on this corner, we are going to prevent further crime in the future. It's a kind of a statistical game that is played based on like certain software, based on certain new form of policing. So this like emerged in 1980s. And that's the thing which is like very appealing. Like it had tremendous effect in New York City. The crime rate has dropped by 80% in New York City since the 1980s. It means like in certain area of New York City, like the South Bronx, crime and homicide rates have been divided by 10. So this kind of very aggressive like policing had a huge like success in the US.
Let's bring in our guest from Michigan State, William Terrell. William, I'm hearing the explanation here from Clement about why this kind of, let's call it proactive policing, but that of course can mean many things. Why this kind of proactive policing may be a way of reducing crime and pointing towards a police force that will be there and will get the criminals and will be proactive about doing that. I still don't understand how we end up with a situation where an unarmed man gets shot dead on the street.
Well, I want to start out with understanding within the U.S. the most violent protests that have occurred since really the late 1960s. In the past 50 years, the most civil unrest that has occurred in the U.S. has been a result of some kind of violent police-citizen interaction. We saw it in major cities throughout the late 60s in Detroit, Los Angeles, Chicago, Newark, New Jersey. We saw it again in Los Angeles in the early 90s with the Rodney King case, and now we're seeing it again with this particular case. And so it's important to understand that the police only have the power because the people give it to them. They only have legitimacy to stop and use their powers because the citizens give it to them. And in this particular case, it's become so violent post-shooting because the public is frustrated and they don't see the police as a legitimate force anymore. So that's kind of a broader context of, I think that's important. In terms of this proactive policing, your guest is correct. One form of policing that started in the 1980s has been known as broken windows policing, or more correctly, order maintenance, aggressive order maintenance policing. And that's where the police interject on these low-level types of infractions with the hope that it reduces more serious crime. And in places like New York, it has been shown to be successful. But most U.S. police agencies do not engage in that form of policing. They engage in other forms of policing or community policing that started in the 80s, something known as problem-oriented policing, which is a more targeted approach that focuses on those hotspots. But the difficulty is that those hotspots also often involve areas that are crime-plagued, that have racial inequality, that have income inequality. And so there's a real distrust between the police and the public. And that's what we saw in this particular case. We saw a police agency that's predominantly white policing a racially predominantly minority neighborhood with high crime and high income inequality. And when you have that type of scenario, you get this type of situation that could turn deadly, and it did in Ferguson.
You're not surprised by what we've seen then?
Absolutely not.
Thank you, sir. Bear with us. We'll bring in Tef Poe again, who's organising protests, calm protests, let me stress this. Tef Poe, we've not had any contribution from the police, and that's regrettable because I think they have a role to play in this debate, but they've refused to take part. I think what we're hearing is that there's a kind of underlying sense, and I think this is shared in many countries, that the police force is racist. Would you agree with that, Tef Poe?
I don't agree that the entire police force is racist. I feel as if, you know, as with any other organization, you have a few bad apples in the batch. And unfortunately, the culture of the police is to remain silent and never break oath and protect your brothers. So what we're witnessing right now is the police chief of Ferguson, the police chief of the St. Louis County, and all the elected officials watching Ferguson and the neighboring communities burn to hell in order to protect one person who more than likely is guilty.
I have to say, because I'm obliged to say, that of course he's innocent until proven guilty. The police officer in question currently on leave, still being paid. Michael Brown's family's called for him to be arrested at TEFPO. Now, I know that would be something that would go down extremely well on the streets. Would that calm the situation? Would that stop the riots, do you think?
I think that a line of compassionate communication between the police force and the community will calm things down. I think that it does start with the arrest of Darren Wilson. I think that you have to start circulating propaganda to show the community that you actually care about what happened. Right now, on the ground in St. Louis, it appears to be a massive cover-up. All energy indicates that a cover-up is happening. People don't even know if this guy will be charged. We're hearing rumors that he's out of the country as we speak. There's just no way to police the police and ensure us in the community that they'll do what's right in this situation.
We're nearing the end of this opening half of our debate, but I'll say to TEFPO and to William Terrell there in Michigan, not to hesitate if you have something to contribute when any of our speakers here are talking, so we can keep the debate moving along. Can I just come to you, Nicole, for a final comment in this half of the programme? We're hearing a sense that this was something that was boiling up, bubbling up over generations. We're hearing a sense that the police have a difficult job to do, and there's been this proactive aspect of trying to make things happen. This is clearly an issue that is happening in all American cities.
Absolutely, and I think this is one of the reasons why the debate is so open and so wide, nationwide, about the Michael Brown's case. People are afraid of the police, and as you mentioned, the police is doing a difficult job. I mean, not all what they did in the last 20 years is negative. You can raise your family in Harlem. You can raise your family in the South Bronx. It was absolutely impossible in the 1980s. Shots and drug dealers were everywhere. But everything has been taken one step further. Like in Ferguson, what we have seen is something that's happening actually across the country, is that you don't see any difference between the army, between the soldiers, and the police. I mean, look at the equipment that rolled down the streets of Ferguson. Armored vehicles, snipers lying on the roofs, pointing at people, camouflage uniforms, black helmets. I mean, they were dealing at the time with 200 or 300 protesters.
There have been calls to demilitarize that situation. Maybe that's the issue of guns that could be one of the trigger factors, if you like, no pun intended, that's pushed this further. We need to take a short break now. Much more from our guests, of course, on this very, very, very hot topic of the moment. That's part one of our debate. Stay with us.
Reporters.
Kathmandu Airport. Every day, Nepali workers venture to Gulf nations in search of a better life. Some of those workers will lose their lives. For the Himalayan villagers who survive, the Arabian Peninsula is their new home. Their plight is a feverish pace of little or no wages or freedom, or the ingredients of modern organised slavery. From Nepal to Qatar, France 24 investigates the dire conditions of the Nepali exodus.
Reporters on France 24 and France24.com.